let's go on to the Mormon example. Alright, so if you don't know, the Mormon church was founded in the 1800s, in the early 1800s. I think in the 1820s is when this all began, by this guy who lived in upstate New York named Joseph Smith, who was just a teenager at the time. And it's a bit debated whether or not he was a con man or crazy, or a true believer and crazy. Because his upbringing was a very religious upbringing that was like the perfect environment for him to start a cult, like a crazy religious cult. But at the same time, there's a lot of evidence that he was just a con man. So we'll just go with the con man theory for the sake of this video, because there's so much evidence for it. I mean, like his first revelation that he got from God, one of his first ones was like to his wife that, God told him to marry their maid, so he can sleep with the maid. And like, it appears that Joseph Smith was making a risky play for power, and he did end up getting killed because of his religious efforts. It was his religion that got him killed. But it appears that he was making a risky play for power. He was taking chances, making moves, gaining power. Eventually it caught up with him and he got killed. So like, the question becomes, was that what the apostles were doing? Were the apostles just making like a risky play for power? Peter and Paul got killed, but maybe they just thought like, we're going to get this Christianity scam going. We got to take a lot of chances along the way, but it'll work out for us in the long run. Okay, so we'll go through the Joseph Smith story, and then we'll talk about some of the differences. With Joseph Smith, it was like, okay, so he starts his religious group in upstate New York. He did change what's called the first vision. There's like 4 different versions of it that we know that he claimed, and they contradict each other. But anyway, his first vision, I don't know, we'll go to the final form where it's like Jesus and God and the Father come speak to him, and Peter comes and lays hands on him to ordain the new church, because right after the apostles died, all of Christianity fell away, and he's got to start this new church, and like the full plan of salvation, and he keeps getting more and more revelations from God. Like, it's like, oh, you've got to have more than one wife to complete the plan of salvation. And oh, you've got to be white to complete the plan of salvation. But like, everybody goes to heaven, but you have to to complete the plan of salvation, you have to do all these things, you have to give 10% of your money to the church, So the polygamy thing, the having more than one wife thing, gets them kicked out of New York. I think like as they left, the government shot cannons at them, or it was something like that. It got, threats of violence became an issue, and they left and went to Missouri. So like, yeah, you have freedom of religion in America, but like, most of the states pass laws requiring you to be a certain religion. Or so the real freedom of religion was in the U.S. territories, because then you're just under the Bill of Rights. So like, that's why you have all these revivals in Tennessee, in the early 1800s, in the Second Great Awakening, because everybody's going there, and they've got this religious freedom thing. So he goes to Missouri, which I think wasn't a state, and his whole church moves to this little town called Nauvoo, or is it Nauvoo, Illinois? I think it was Illinois, which I think also wasn't a state at the time. Anyway, I can't remember exactly. It's on the banks of the Mississippi, if I remember right. So Nauvoo, and he claims that Nauvoo was where the Garden of Eden really was. It's really the Garden of Eden, and stuff like that. because his town basically becomes like the whole town, his church becomes the whole town, he becomes the mayor of the town. So like a newspaper prints something against him saying that he's been sleeping with other people's wives and other corrupt dealings and abuses of power and immoral things that he does. And like, because like he went so far as to marry other people's wives, secret marriages to other people's wives so he could sleep with other people's wives. So like polyamory, which is where a wife has more than one husband. Yeah. So I mean, because God said so. That's with Joseph Smith. It's always because God said so. So like, and when he dies, his wife takes the kids and leaves. But like, so anyway, he sends the cops to burn down and destroy the newspaper that printed stuff that said nasty things about him. So then a riot mob, a lynch mob, like comes to kill him, and so then it's like okay, I'll just go to the judge in the next town over, the federal judge, and wait trial, and we'll sort this out. So him and his brother Hiram go up there, and then the mob comes there, and they come. He's on the second floor. And it's a Wild West thing it's like 1840s, and like he gets a 6-shooter out, hits 2 of them, and then he falls out a window. And the big debate is, was he dead before he hit the ground, or did he die from hitting the ground? So the Mormons claim that he was a martyr and died for his faith. And this strikes us a little bit odd, like, really? He was a martyr? So the word martyr comes from an old Greek word that means witness. I think it's martus. And so the reason it becomes this word that means somebody that died for their faith is because so many Christians were executed, and they could have recanted and said, I'm not a Christian, but and then they saved their lives. But they refuse to say that, so they're executed. So that's that's different, So like, Joseph Smith's taking a risk, and like, as I hate to say this, but he had a fighting chance in that situation. Like, he had a gun, he hit 2 guys, he lost the fight. It's not the same thing as the traditional concept of martyrs. But the question we have to address is like, okay, but were the apostles killed in the way that is well known for later Christians, especially in the big persecutions that Rome did when Christianity got big? Like, okay, were the apostles really martyred, or were they just killed, or did they die in a fight, and that kind of thing. So this is important for us. So first of all, we need to take a look at, we'll just take a look at, the basic evidence. We'll start with, we'll go back to our Polycarp evidence that, the apostles were, killed. Polycarp writes to the Philippians about how the Philippians themselves observed the apostles enduring violent persecution there. Okay, so he's not going to lie about that. So, in that case, it's well, okay, they endured violent persecution, and he writes clearly about what it's about. He's in a position to know John. So, okay. Other evidence? Well, there's a lot of it, and it was covered in that video, What Did the Disciples Really Believe? But one piece that really sticks out is that this later Christian named Tertullian says that Peter and Paul were executed for their faith in Rome under the Emperor Nero, which would have been around 64, 67 AD. It's known through other historical sources that Nero, we'll take a look at. Nero persecuted Christians. So the thing about Tertullian is he says, and anybody who doesn't believe me can check the official government records. So like when he says something like that, it makes it very likely that you could check the official government records on this. So in that case, it raises serious questions about, Polycarp being martyred in Smyrna. The story of the martyrdom of Polycarp has it happening in like a big arena, kind of thing. He was a big shot. He was the leader of the church. Okay, now the issue is like, okay, Peter and Paul were executed. Okay, but hold on. That's not really what Polycarp's talking about. Like, let's go back and look. Polycarp to the Philippians. Polycarp to the Philippians. Polycarp to the Philippians. Okay, so it should come up. Ooh, clicked on the wrong thing. Early Christian writings. Okay, and he says, he goes on and on about this, but he that raised him from the dead will raise us also, if we do his will and walk in his commandments and love the things which he loved. Alright? For neither I am, nor is any other like unto me, able to follow the wisdom of the blessed and glorious Paul when he came unto you and taught face to face with men that he also, the word which concerneth the truth carefully and surely. Okay? Let's see. Alright, let us therefore serve him with fear and all reverence, as he gave commandment, and the apostles who preached the gospel to us, and the prophets who proclaimed beforehand the coming of our Lord. Alright? So, alright, I am scanning through this. I want to read it. Well, where is it in here? Oh, here it is. Polycarp 8:1. Let us therefore without ceasing hold fast by our hope, and by the earnest of our righteousness, which is Jesus Christ, who took up our sins in his own body upon the tree, who did no sin, neither was guile found in his mouth, but for our sakes he, remember this word, endured all things that we might live with him. Let us therefore become imitators of his endurance, and if we should suffer for his name's sake, let us glorify him. For he gave this example to us in his own person, and we believe this. Alright? I exhort you all, therefore. So when he talks about endurance, he's talking about Christ's crucifixion, or imitation of Christ's endurance on the cross. Okay? I exhort you all, therefore, to be obedient unto the word of righteousness, and to practice all endurance, which also you saw, so they would know if he was lying. So he's not going to lie to them about this. You saw with your own eyes in the blessed Ignatius, Zosimus, and Rufus, yea, and in others who also came up from among yourselves, as well as in Paul himself and the rest of the apostles. Okay, so in Ignatius' case, we know he was martyred in Rome. He's this guy who knew Polycarp. We have correspondence between Polycarp and him in letters. And Ignatius literally writes, he goes on this long martyr walk, and he writes to the church in Rome, like, okay, guys, don't try to stop them from executing me. Okay? So, again, he's not going to lie to them about that. At least he thought he was going to be executed. Okay, because if he gets there and it's like, oh, you weren't supposed to be executed, there'd be a lot of egg on his face, right? So they would know, like, the audience would know. So we'll hang on to this passage from Polycarp, and then we'll go back. Let's see. So, all right. Peter and Paul executed. Tertullian talks about it. It's the Roman historians Tacitus and Suetonius, who like tell us about Nero persecuting Christians, they don't say anything about Peter and Paul. But like the thing about those two is they are Tacitus and Suetonius are historians who write historical accounts. They're not writing letters to churches or anything, and like they try to be detached. But more importantly, they make it clear that they use official government records for everything. And if they don't, they say, okay, in this place, like, this is, like, I'm getting this from somebody, this is hearsay, or I talked to somebody, but you're not able to research official government records on this. And it's like, okay, in these cases, like, there's not much motivation for the official government records to be falsified in these cases. They didn't really kill Peter and Paul and that kind of thing. So they were most likely martyred in Rome. Okay, so it goes beyond that, though, because the evidence is not just that. You see, Joseph Smith got in a dangerous situation one time. You know, they pulled up some cannons, and so he left New York State, and then he gets in a dangerous situation one time. He has a fighting chance, but he loses the fight. That's a risky play for power. And in fact, when he died, he was running for president at the time, and if he didn't win, he was already organizing Native American tribes to help fight with his Mormon church to conquer America militarily. So that's a risky play for power. Okay, maybe he thought the coming Civil War would weaken. You know, I don't know, but he wasn't going to win that fight. The issue is not just that the apostles were willing to die, died, but they faced death on a regular basis. I mean, Polycarp tells us, as with the rest of the apostles, and he talks about Ignatius and Paul. It appears that some members from the church in Philippi went to Rome and saw that happen, because Ignatius goes on, like in Ignatius' case, he goes on this martyr walk, and he goes this long, slow journey to his execution, and he writes letters to all the churches before he comes there, and then he goes to Rome, and apparently some people went with him. And in Paul's case, apparently they were there. Some Philippians were there and saw it happen, you know. So, like, but the issue is not just that. It's the repeat near-death experiences, you know. Not like I died and I went into heaven or whatever, but like they narrowly escaped death. So, like 1 Thessalonians, for example, Paul writes to them about how he was violently persecuted along with them. And so, again, Paul's not going to lie to them about that. He did experience violent persecutions. This is before he's executed. But in addition to that, he's writing them about the real reason he brings that whole topic up was because they're concerned about what is going to happen to all the Christians who were killed in the violent persecution. Because they thought everyone was going to be alive until Jesus came back. And he explains that like it's not going to work like that. And so this is where it gets interesting. It's like, oh, people were dying. Not a thing with Joseph Smith and Mormonism. People were getting killed. Okay. Further evidence. I mean, there's a lot of examples like this, and we listed out more of them in our video on what the apostles really believe. But I'm trying to list some things that repeat some things, but also add some things in I didn't talk about. 2 Corinthians 11. Paul seems to be concerned about exactly what we're talking about in 1 and 2 Corinthians. That the Corinthian church was really saying that he's just trying to get money out of us. Or this is some kind of play for power or something like this. And he lists out in 2 Corinthians 11, because he is taking up this collection, you know, of money to take back to Jerusalem. And then this raises the question of whether or not you can trust him. Like, with all this money, you're supposed to be given to help, you know, the hardships of the poor, and you wind up just giving it to Paul, and then it doesn't, you know, Paul just, you know, he just runs off with the money. And so he lists out in 2 Corinthians 11 this like list of his hardships he's endured for Christianity as exactly what we're talking about, that he's a true believer. He really believes this stuff. And then he says this, and this is key to understand, think this through. Look at 2 Corinthians 11 for yourself and you see what I'm talking about. He says, God is his witness that he is not lying about his hardships. Then he goes on to say this, that the governor of Damascus had the city guarded to keep him from escaping, and he was lowered from the wall in a basket. So, again, which of those could they have checked? The one about the governor of Damascus. Okay? Because he gave a location. I think he names the guy. Let's see. 2 space COR11 space 11. Okay? 2 Corinthians 11. Paul and the false apostles, the super apostles. He names the guy, King Aretas. So again, given what we know about Roman records of who they executed and stuff, and how Tacitus used it, Suetonius used it, that would have been researchable. So he goes through this list of people that, what do you think when he says, the God and Father of our Lord Jesus, who is to be praised forever, knows that I'm not lying, and then he adds this other one about King Aretas. Which one's the more extreme? The one where he's lowered in a basket to escape the guards, or the one where he's all this other stuff before it is clearly the more extreme. So if he was going to lie, it'd be about the other stuff. He's gone without sleep. He's been toiled in hunger and thirst and gone without food. He's been cold and naked for the sake of spreading the gospel. And he's concerned for all the churches. He's been in danger from rivers, from bandits, from fellow Jews, in danger from Gentiles, in danger in the city, in danger in the country, danger at sea, danger from false believers. All right? Three times I was beaten with rods. Once I was pelted with stones. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a day and night in the open sea. I've been constantly on the move. In other words, without a boat. Danger from rivers, danger from bandits. Okay, I've been flogged more severely, exposed to, if he's lying about that stuff. So he says, God is my witness, I'm not lying, or God knows I'm not lying. And then he says this other thing that they could have researched. So, again, the evidence is heavy that, Paul didn't face death just this one time when he died. It was a lifestyle of constantly facing death.